With you today, I am David Weindorf, your Vice President for Research and Innovation. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today for Research Leadership Discussion number 14. Everything you ever wanted to know about research compliance, but were afraid to ask. It's a snowy day out there today. Some people will say that we didn't qualify for a football bowl game this year. But my response to that is we already played in one. It was the Snow Bowl, and that was Wednesday night. And my goodness, it was something else to watch for sure. So anyway, on to our topic of the day. I'm really excited to have an outstanding panel with us today to answer some different questions. And for those of you who may be new to the research leadership discussions, what we typically do is I have a set of questions that I'm going to pose to the panel and ask for their various responses. But as we go throughout the discussion, if our audience members have a question, they can put that in the chat, or they can certainly raise a hand, turn on their audio and video, and ask our panelists aloud. And we'll just kind of have the conversation flow like that. We want to give the audience members plenty of opportunity to pose their own questions as well. But as we get started today, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and I'll call on you by name so we know who is up next for those sorts of things. So I'd like to start off with Belinda Adamson.
I'm Belinda, and I'm the Director of Research Compliance, so I oversee the staff and the committee functions for this office.
Thank you so much. Deb Giesler.
I am the IRB coordinator. I work with the investigators from both the Mount Pleasant campus and the Children's Hospital pediatricians.
Thank you so much. Kristen DeMuro.
I'm the Assistant Director for the Office of Research Compliance, supporting all of the committees as well as export compliance and controlled substances.
Thank you so much. Jennifer Mars. Oh, you're muted, Jennifer.
Jeez. I'm the IACUC and IBC coordinator. I've been on the job for just about a month, so I'm learning but enjoying the work. I support both committees, both chairs.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Rachel Nelson.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rachel Nelson and the current chair of the IRB.
Very good. John Kelty.
Hi, everybody. I'm John Kelty. I am the chair of the IACUC, the Animal Care and Use Committee, and I am faculty in biology.
Excellent. Thank you. And Greg Colores.
Hi, I'm Greg Colores. I'm a faculty member in biology, and I'm the chair of the IBC, the Institutional Biosafety Committee.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much again for being with us today and answering these various questions and really supporting the campus community in terms of many different aspects of research compliance. So I want to offer up a question to get things started today, the first of which is, could you all please start with a brief overview of the three major committees, the IRB, the IACUC, and the IBC? Tell us kind of what they do, how often they meet, and again, kind of the oversight structure of each of those.
So I guess we can start with IRB. The IRB oversees everything that falls under the category of human subjects research, and that really has to meet two criteria. So the first criteria is there has to be interaction with humans, and that can be directly through data collection in person, or it could be indirectly, maybe through an anonymous survey, but either one of those would qualify as interacting with humans. And then the other aspect of it is that it has to meet the definition of human subjects, specifically research. So that's the second criteria is research. So it has to be a systematic investigation that produces generalizable data. So it is very possible for a project to involve humans and maybe even carry an element of risk associated with it, but potentially it's not generalizable data, and that would not be something that the IRB would review. We've had cases like that come through, and generally the dean of the college where that project is taking place will take on the responsibility of oversight. And then on the flip side of things, we can have projects that do not include interaction with humans, but definitely meet the definition of research. But again, for the IRB to review it, it has to meet both those criteria, include humans and be research. So with that, I'm actually going to kick it to Deb. She can tell you more about how frequently we meet.
We do meet the full board committee if a proposal comes through that is more than minimal risk, or if it is a study that cannot fit into one of our minimal risks categories. The full board will meet once a month. We do meet, I believe, on the second Friday of every month in the fall semester, the fourth Friday of every month in the spring semester. In summer, the committee still does work during the summer. Meetings are called on an ad hoc basis. If there is a urgent proposal that comes through that doesn't fit into our scheduled meetings, we do have the ability to hold an ad hoc meeting to expedite the review process.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. And maybe next, let's shift over to IACUC.
All right, I think I even unmuted myself. All right, so and trust me, that's a challenge some days. So the IACUC, the technical answer to this question is the IACUC is responsible for oversight of the animal care and use program at the institution. What that really means in practical terms is we review animal care and use applications, we inspect facilities, and so forth. The next logical question is, what is the program, right? The program is really anything dealing with vertebrate animals at the university, right? So we currently don't oversee any work with invertebrates, but all vertebrate animals. The better answer to that question, I think, or an additional part of the answer to that question is, we see our role on the IACUC as helping researchers get their work going, get their work done in a manner that's compliant with the regulations to help prevent the university from putting themselves in a bad situation, something that puts us at risk of loss of funding. So we'd rather not see that happen. As far as how often we meet as a committee once a month, most months, right? Yeah, that's about it.
Okay, and you'll do meet through the summer as well?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And then briefly, IBC as well, Greg?
I think ours is a little more simplistic in terms of what we deal with. So the IBC, we deal with recombinant nucleic acid work, so recombinant DNA, RNA, and that was our original charge, but we've since added evaluating protocols that deal with potentially pathogenic organisms. So whether typically microorganisms. And so we deal with those types of protocols to prove them, to make sure they're performed safely. We work a lot with lab and field safety, where they conduct initial laboratory audits so that the work is undertaken under sufficiently appropriate conditions. We have members in our committee with expertise in areas that we most commonly see proposals. So for example, molecular biology, animal safety, et cetera. And we meet, I think we meet quarterly, but we frequently add in additional meetings to approve submitted protocols. So if a protocol comes in, as with the others, we meet on an ad hoc basis, and we are available throughout the year as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate that insight from all the committees, just kind of giving a general overview and timelines of when they meet. Dr. Nelson, I know you've been holding what you're calling quote unquote office hours for IRB matters this semester, and I think that's gone really well. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do at those and what the focus of that is?
Yeah, so we've had about 10 IRB office hours this semester so far, and I've had 13 faculty or students show up for the various office hours. So generally they come with their questions, and I've kind of been taking notes on the things that come up during those IRB office hours, and probably the two most common questions that I get are, what does my project, what level of review does my project need to go through? And it's usually not very straightforward. And so meeting in person to discuss the various aspects of the project really helps with that. There's some things you just can't convey via text very well. And then the other thing that comes up very frequently with IRB office hours is, how can I publish research if I get a non-human subjects determination? So I will circle back to the first question and discuss those levels of IRB oversight, if that's okay, briefly.
Mhm.
And then I'll ask Belinda to step in to talk about the second common question that comes up. So we really basically on the IRB have 4 levels of review. So the first would be a determination whether something meets the human subjects research definition. And this is usually for investigators that are unsure if their project does. And so they want to submit materials and find out, hey, do I really need to go through the entire IRB review process? Or it's for investigators that are pretty confident that their project does not fall under the umbrella of human subjects research, but they want that determination letter. So that's the most basic. And then after that, we have 3 levels. We have exempt, expedited, and full board. And I'll start with exempt because that seems to be the most complicated one for everyone. And it's probably because it's a horrible name. Exempt sounds like there should be no oversight, and that's not the case. So it's just exempt from a particular level of federal guidelines. And I call it Belinda's superpower. She can tell you the exact number of those federal guidelines, but I'm not going to go into that level of detail today. But this came about with the change in the Common Rule federal guidelines that oversee human subjects research in 2018. And so there are particular categories of exempt research that are exempt from more stringent federal guidelines. And so it's a more abbreviated application. The review is typically not quite as stringent because these are really minimal risk, or even, you might even be fair to say, no risk protocols. So that's the most basic. It's a shorter application. And then we have expedited category. And so this is reviewed by typically 1 to 2 board members, depending on the projects, what the project includes and the area of expertise that's required to review it. So I'll give you an example. Let's say a project includes education, but it's also with adolescents. That might be a project that would need to go both to someone with expertise in education and someone with expertise working with children. Other projects might only need to go to 1 reviewer. So expedited, it has to fall under one of 8 or 9 categories. I'm not going to go into tremendous detail with that, but a simple Google search of human subjects expedited categories will bring those up. And then everything that falls above what we call minimal risk, and I'll take a moment to define that here in a minute, goes to the full board for review. So minimal risk is a project that does not increase the participants' risk beyond their normal daily activities. So for example, I'm going to default to my field. I'm in exercise physiology. So if I want to recruit people to an exercise intervention and they are already exercisers, that is not introducing any additional risk into their day. So depending on everything else involved in the project being minimal risk, that might be able to go to the expedited category. But let's say that I want to bring in patients who have recently had a heart attack. They are non-exercisers, and I want to put them through an exercise protocol. Now we're talking about elevating it probably to more than, potentially, depending on the exercise intensity, more than that minimal risk category, because it's beyond the scope of their everyday lives. So those are just a couple examples there. So Belinda, this might be a good time for you to step in and talk about, what happens if an investigator gets that determination that it's non-human subjects research and they have this knee-jerk reaction of, how am I going to publish it, right? Where do you go from there?
Okay, when we recommend, when you're not sure if your research needs to come through the IRB, we've got an application that basically gives us enough information to say, does it meet research? Does it meet human subject involvement? And from that, if we're sitting here saying it doesn't meet one of those 2 criteria, we're going to give you a determination letter, basically sitting here saying, we have looked at it. It does not fit the definition of OHRP, which is our federal agency we report to, definition of research and human subject research. So we're giving you this letter. And the reason we want to give you this letter, in the past 5 to 10 years, journal are coming back saying, have you gone through your IRB? And by coming through and doing this short application, we can give you this letter and you can give it to the the journal, and it says, we're fine. We can go ahead and what the research that we did, the manuscript that we put together, it had a determination from the IRB. So a lot of times you will see that with case studies, if you're doing it in the medical field, because we do oversee the medical work that is done down at the pediatric hospital in Detroit. And then sometimes it's with your QA/QI studies. You're sitting here saying, well, those aren't research. You can go ahead, they may look like research because you've got a objective and it may be generalizable, but it may be generalizable only to your multiple colleges, but not to the outside, to an outside institution. So you can still go ahead and publish that, and it would be still coming under one of these not human subject determination letters. And it's allowing you to then go ahead and submit your manuscript to a journal.
Excellent. So are there analogs then for IBC and IACUC as well in terms of these various determinations?
Not to the same extent.
Okay.
The closest IACUC ever comes, and I'm only speaking for IACUC here, is when researchers come to us saying, hey, I'm going to do something like, oh, I don't know, observe birds through binoculars from at least 100 yards away. Do I need an IACUC protocol for that? And by the way, the answer for that is no. If that all you're doing is observing remotely, you don't. That's about as close as we get. But there are some gray areas, right? So if that same researcher is feeding the birds,
yeah.
Now they're altering the behavior of the animals, and they would require IACUC approval. But beyond that, really any use of vertebrate animals for research, teaching, or outreach are technically under the purview of the IACUC and need to be reviewed.
You know, John, one of the things that comes to mind is we have a lot of interest these days in drones, right? So if you were to fly a drone out to an area to observe an animal by hovering over it, would something like that constitute disturbing the animal? Or, you know, it makes noise, right? Those sort of things. I don't put you on the spot. I'm just curious if you have a thought.
No, we get questions like this frequently, right? At least a few times a semester. So in that case, anything that's going to produce noise in the animal's environment could potentially materially alter the behavior of the animal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the criteria that we use to determine whether or not a protocol or a project is going to require review.
Okay.
So certainly our attending veterinarians, others on the IACUC would all argue that we should at least look at the protocol that's going to be carried out.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg, what about from the IBC standpoint? Various types of determinations, or is it kind of one or the other?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we'll get protocols work with recombinant nucleic acids or potential pathogens. So we'll receive a protocol, and that initially goes through administrative review. And so that level, it involves ours are submitted through IRB Manager. So we also use IRB Manager, and then it goes through administrative review where myself and a laboratory safety specialist from OLFS, the Office of Laboratory and Field Safety, will review it and determine whether the protocol needs to go through, well, first, whether there are things missing from it that we'd like to see, and then whether or not it needs to go through full committee for approval, or we have the NIH stipulates different levels of risk or approval. And one of the most common ones we receive is may proceed with committee acknowledgement. So once they notify us, they can proceed with the research. Other times it must go to full committee. So then we go through the initial administrative review and then submit it, or let that decision be known to our determination be known to the investigator, and then it will come back to the full committee.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for that. This might be a question for Jennifer Mars, for Deb Giesler. What are some of the most common reasons you see IRB or IACUC applications getting sent back to an investigator for more information or clarification?
Mm-hmm. Mhm. So when an investigator doesn't provide enough information within their application form to walk the reviewer through every component of their research study, it'll get sent back, asking for additional information. Even in this day and age of technology, data security is so important for every proposal that comes through, even if it does seem like a simple online survey. We really encourage investigators to speak to their IT directors to put together a solid data security plan before coming to the IRB with their proposal. Those directors are Tim Gramza, Mike Reuter, Kurt Smith, and Ben Indera. They are all sitting members on my board, so they are very aware of the criteria for approval that these protocols need to go through before getting to the approval stage. And they are always available and happy, very happy to speak to investigators to make sure the technology being used is supported by CMU.
Excellent. Jennifer, anything from the iCook side or?
Well, in my short time of experience here, just on the basic level for me that I would see would be if the people who will be on the protocol, their training isn't up to date, they haven't gotten occupational health approval. That's the very basic level that I've seen. And John, maybe you can further elaborate on other things, but
Yeah, I'll follow up on that. But I think Rachel has her hand up too, and I want to let her have a chance to follow up on Deb's comments first.
Oh, thanks, John. Real quick, I was just going to put our last 2 points together from an IRB perspective, and that's related to social behavioral risk. So what we kind of see on our side of things is if an investigator is going to miss a risk to participants, it's going to be social behavioral related. So what prompted me to think of this was when John said, hey, if an investigator is going to observe birds and not interact with them from 100 feet, we don't really need to see that or approve that. Now that is something that would come to the IRB if it was a human, and it would probably go exempt. But what we would want to see is that certain protections are in place for those participants. And so I can give you an example. Let's say they want to observe students on campus, but then they're going to collect information like hair color, skin color, any noticeable tattoos or piercings. And the next thing you know, I can start figuring out who they were observing on campus. So that's kind of a distinction there. And then where IT comes in is if we're collecting that data where you can put all of these pieces together and identify someone, or you're collecting sensitive information, working with the IT folks is so very, very important to make sure that that data is secured. Because while the IRB oversees human subjects research, our charge is to minimize risk and protect participants. And so that's what we're looking to do.
Excellent. Let's go quickly to John and then to Belinda.
Yeah, and actually, since Belinda's going to probably follow up on this IRB issue, I'll defer to Belinda for the time being.
Okay.
Okay, what I wanted to also bring into the fact that it may get sent, an application from an IRB standpoint may get sent back because of, it may need animal review because you're needing tissue to be able to do something with a project. This may be more in the medical aspect when we're working down like in Children's Hospital. Also with Children's Hospital, they have a institutional process that they also have to go through. So that can be some reason why we're sitting here sending an IRB application back. But then we also have to look at, does something have to have a radiation safety sign off? So is there some ancillary institutional committee that also may have to be reviewing this because of their role in the project and making sure that it's following institutional procedures?
Excellent. Let me
So-
pause right here for just a second and see if we have any questions from those in the audience. Either someone wants to put something in the chat, or if they want to turn their video on for a second and pose a question to one of our panelists. Anybody in the audience want to do that? Okay, that's all right. We will forge ahead. I've got some other questions I want to prompt as well. And again, I'll encourage our audience members, if they do have questions, feel free to raise a hand or put something in the chat at any moment. Kristen, I want to ask this question to you. I know CMU's been working on updates to its animal handler policy with guidance from the NIH's Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare. Can you tell us a little bit about how those changes will impact folks at CMU and kind of where we are in the process to date?
Sure, thank you. So to give some background info for individuals who haven't heard why the occupational health review process has changed, CMU has a assurance with the Public Health Service assurance with the Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare, and we update that every 4 years. In the process of us doing that update, might have started late 2020 and started the review process through 2021. OLA, the Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare, identified concerns they had with our process, and in specific to this situation was the occupational health program. They did not accept the current process of a kind of a self-review. To be brief, they required us to have an occupational health provider involved in that process to make sure that appropriate safety measures were taken place for individuals who may be immunocompromised or, based upon the research, may have additional risks that the individual participants may not identify or be aware of. So because of this, there was a lot of kind of back and forth negotiations on what they were requiring, what our current process was, and it boiled down to we had to change and include an occupational health provider. So with that, our IACUC and individuals from Lab and Field Safety, we collaborated with McLaren, the current occupational health provider for the university, to come up with the process. I would say that the review process is similar to previous individuals who opted in for an occupational health review, but now it's required for individuals who will be handling animals. It is not required for individuals who will only be kind of working as a visitor, and they're not going to be handling animals. They might just be observing. Individuals of that nature are not required to participate.
Or custodial staff or people like that, right? Yeah.
Correct. Or
Yeah.
we make it available and they may opt to participate, but it is
Okay.
not required.
Yeah.
For individuals, if they're looking for essentially unrestricted access to the facilities so that they would have FOB access for them to do research related activities, they are required to opt in. Principal investigators are required to opt in due to the requirement of them to oversee the animal research project, regardless of how often they may enter the facilities.
Yeah.
John, am I missing any of those kind of ticket items?
No,
Okay.
okay, making sure I'm unmuted here. But no, in terms of background, I think you've hit the high points for sure. And David, was part of your question too, how is this going to impact investigators?
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
just knowing what the changes are, I know there's been kind of a backlog over at McLaren and getting folks through there, but I think some of those are hopefully starting to unwind a little bit. Any other like direct impacts that you want to just speak to in terms of how it will change the way people have traditionally done things at CMU?
So in a way, this is a return to the way things used to be done once upon a time.
Okay.
For a period of years, we actually had essentially this same program in place, or a very similar program in place, before we switched to the self-assessment. One change now has to do with the very practical issue of billing, right? In the past, there was no clarity, right? It would change frequently during any given discussion. Now, the billing for this process, for the medical questionnaire and all that, goes to departments, and departments determine what's going to happen. At least that's my understanding, Kristen, if that sounds right to you. So
That is correct.
the good news is the charge for the initial medical questionnaire is pretty minimal. And I think it's left up to departments and potentially some other units to figure out how to cover costs for any additional testing that might be needed.
Yeah. And just to be clear that in this period of transition, we have remained in compliance with federal guidance. They've given us kind of a transitional period of time to develop our new policy and get that implemented. So it's not that we've fallen out of compliance in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. So
That is correct.
okay, let's shift gears just a little bit. Gosh, we talked about IBC, we talked about IRB, IACUC. Let's talk about export control for a second, and this probably falls to Belinda. What are the most common types of export control violations, and how can a faculty member protect themselves? Maybe you have some thoughts on what special precautions should be undertaken when traveling to a foreign country or working with a foreign national, and what resources do we as a university offer in this regard?
Well, I'm going to transfer that over to Kristen because she does it in cooperation with me, but she does a lot of the initial investigation of, you know, what the question is and how it's going to maybe impact on the procedure that's coming through.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in general, universities have faced consequences for export control violations based upon, for example, intentional or even unintentional sharing of data or technology. And that could be sharing it with the public, accidentally posting something online and making it available to the general public, or even sharing it with restricted parties. Some of that data or technology, for example, could be military controlled technology, or it could just be something, for example, like an IT-based thing, you know, wireless systems, things that kind of impact the kind of protection and structure of the, you know, the country as a whole, could fall under these kind of restricted data sharing information. So export control, often we think of it as kind of tangible things that you're shipping something or, you know, something of that nature, but it can also be sharing of data, or even somebody coming to campus and you showing them something that might be part of your research. So international collaboration is another item that universities have been kind of sanctioned for, and often including particularly related to inadequate screening procedures. So not only does our office have the ability to screen individuals that may be collaborating or working directly, but also and I'm blanking on the exact name, but the International Affairs Office might not be the right name, but something along
Office
that
of
nature.
Global Engagement, right. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That group also has the ability to screen individuals as well, and we use the same program. So one of the support functions that our office can do is help researchers and the research community and the university community look into these things. We have a process where we, you know, if you have project work that involve travel outside of the US, reach out to us. We can help make sure that if there's any concern, for example, if you're bringing a laptop, what's on the laptop, we would probably work with IT to make sure that you're as protected as possible, remove extraneous data that doesn't need to be there, things of that nature. If you're working with collaborators or visitors that are non-US persons, we can help screen them and make sure that no individuals are on a watch list or a restricted party list. And that also includes not just individuals, but also companies and groups, you know, of larger entities as well. We can look at any data or materials that you may be exporting and look to make sure that they're not on any restricted list that may require a license or special approval in order to send. So our goal is just to keep everybody out of jail and minimize the risk of that.
And I would say over time, realize that who's on the watch list, what countries we need to be cautious with, that's not static. It changes,
No,
right? All
correct.
the time in response to political dynamics and threats that our country may be facing. When I was at my previous institution, you know, I did quite a bit of international travel as part of my own personal research career. And one of the practices that I implemented was I would always take a blank laptop with me when I traveled internationally. And the data that I needed, I took on an encrypted hard drive. So you had to input a certain code in order to access the data. So if I was stopped and they wanted to either confiscate the laptop or the hard drive, they wouldn't be able to extract any data from either of those. So you always have to face think about the potential for those types of things to happen. You know, I would say that it is unlikely that those happen, but you never know, right? They have an axe to grind and they say, hey, we want to make an example of this person. You never know the circumstance that you might find yourself in. And then another thing I just, think about when operating in those types of systems, being cautious of like wireless networks at an airport or something like that. If you're transmitting data over public networks, that's always, you want to be really cautious about that. I try to avoid that at all costs and, just make sure that we don't have the data out there in that capacity. So, let me shift gears again to a different area. I think one of y'all mentioned it. I can't specifically remember which person mentioned this, but the idea of different types of training that may be required to really stay on your A game with regard to research compliance. What types of different training do faculty and students typically undertake when they want to be on the latest cutting edge of research compliance procedures?
From an IRB standpoint for social and behavioral research, we ask the investigators to go into city and complete the social and behavioral investigator modules. The training is good for 3 years.
And Deb, just tell us what city is real quick.
Oh, now you put me on the spot.
Just in case people aren't familiar with the acronym.
It's not the credit card.
Okay,
It is not a credit card.
Right.
I'm gonna have to look that up really quick for you,
But this is
David.
like a national organization that provides this type of training. So.
It is. I believe the training first started through Florida State University. And then it was bought out. More and more of these companies are all coming together under one leadership module. And there's a consultant agency called Branny that I believe is now running these training modules. But this was a homegrown training that came out of FIU, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It stands for Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And what it was is several universities were at the point saying, how do we make sure that the information is getting out to our different researchers? And the Florida institution got an NIH grant, and that ran for close to 15 years of making sure there was money to have the platform and then to be doing the updates that are needed when regulations changed for the animal world, the IBC world, human subjects. And now once it was taken over by Branny, it's now got, it goes into a whole different dynamics of different topics, and institutions can pick and choose which modules that they would like to have.
Mm-hmm.
So can I follow up on this real quick?
Yes, please.
So I'm going to assume everyone on this call either has this, they don't need it, or they need it and they don't know where to start. So I put the link to it in the chat box. And this really covers training for anyone doing human subjects research, social behavioral, or biomedical. And John, please correct me if I'm wrong, but there are also IACUC modules here for working with animals. And so when you go there for the first time, you'll need to create a username and login, and you need to say you're affiliated with CMU. And as long as you do that, this is free. And basically what it's doing is it's laying the foundation for why it's necessary to have oversight on human subjects in animal research, so that we are treating animals humanely and humans humanely, because there's a long history of not doing that.
Even as your vice president for research, who has a background in soil science, I can confidently say I have taken the appropriate areas of city training to make sure that I'm covered as well. So it is very insightful, and you do learn a lot throughout that training. And I think, Belinda, did you say that they need to redo this every 3 years?
Yes, Deb was
Okay.
indicating
Oh,
that.
Deb, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a plug for it.
Okay.
If there's anyone on this call that teaches a research methods class or has honors capstone students going to or work in their lab, please just make it a part of those credit hours.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Yep.
That was great.
I was going to add,
Yeah, go ahead.
more training also. There's lab specific training, depending on, you know, like with chemicals and
Mhm.
that kind of thing. All the different investigators and lab workers would need to take based on what lab they're in, like the
Certainly.
risks. So bloodborne pathogens,
Mhm.
basic lab safety training, and that's sort of facilitated through the Office of Lab and Field Safety, and that's taken through SAP Success Factors. So that's a separate training format, but so you would contact their office to enroll in that. So
Excellent.
Mhm.
Very
So
good.
it's a separate training platform, but
Yes.
they can cross over into IACUC and IRB
Mhm.
training needs before we provide those final approvals back to investigators.
Excellent.
And
Excellent.
on the animal side of things also, depending on the investigators and what they're doing, personnel may need to do some face-to-face training for, say, facility orientations.
Mhm.
In some cases, basic surgical techniques and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Excellent.
can I
Oh, yeah, jump
just
in here. Go ahead,
just one
Greg. Yeah.
thing? So with IBC, we typically see, so as Jen mentioned, bloodborne pathogen training, basic lab safety, BSL2, so biosafety level 2 training is one that the one that's being produced right now or being updated, and chemical safety. So these are all things that our investigators typically have to complete, whether through City or the SAP platform. And as one of the things I failed to mention before was that our the training is also part of our administrative review process. So currently Jen is one that I didn't mention her, sorry. But in terms of administrative review, that they catch a lot of these initially to make sure training is up to date, and then ask for verification of training or pulling that from somewhere off the cloud. I don't know where she gets it from, but we the IBC, IACUC and IBC coordinator does a lot of that for us, so that when we get the proposals, we can just focus on, or when we get the protocols, we can focus on the science and not as much the training that's already done.
Absolutely. This is a good point for us to pause once again and just ask our audience members if they have specific questions. I see that Rachel has posted a couple of things over in the chat for us as well, of the city links and different types of training there. So that is super helpful. Anyone in the audience have some specific questions, want to raise a hand or ask anything of our panelists? Hey, well, again, that offer stands, so feel free to step forward boldly if you have a specific question. I want to touch on something that we were kind of going down that road a little bit, but it's the perfect segue to that. We were talking a little bit about the relationship between the Office of Research Compliance and the Office of Laboratory and Field Safety, and how there's a lot of training that kind of, covers both bases there. Talk a little bit more about how the Office of Research Compliance also interacts with other units on campus. And I think one thing that comes to mind for me would be something like conflicts of interest, right? There are some conflicts of interest that might be housed within research compliance. There might be others that are within sponsored programs or something like that. But what are some of the more common units that you interface with on campus in regard to your work?
Okay, one of the major one we do is lab and field safety, but then we also do Office of Sponsored Projects. But another big component that we see more in the human research side is IT. As Deb indicated, that we have IT people on board, but they're able to say, what are good programs out there? If you're wanting to use a program, is it going to be compatible with our systems? Is there enough safety built in? Where could they be of an assistance to be able to say, okay, we may be able to give you an encrypted hard drive. We may be able to help you to determine if you need to be doing encryptions and stuff like this. So the IT department within each each college and stuff, they're a very big team player for any of our departments to making sure what's going on. Also, with the Office of Sponsored Projects, they're looking over the grants. They're looking over if you're bringing something in like for IBC, like a material transfer of a vector or some DNA from another institution to use in your research. That's all going to be coordinated through Office of Sponsored Projects and stuff. So animal care, human subject research, IBC interacts quite a bit with lab safety and for Office of Research for sponsored projects.
Excellent. John, can you talk a little bit about what role people on the call may not know that we have 2 veterinarians that work with CMU very closely in making sure that all of our animal policies and protocols are definitely in alignment with federal and state regulations. Can you talk a little bit about the role that they play?
Sure, absolutely. So the 2 veterinarians can play interchangeable roles, but we divide those roles up into attending veterinarian and clinical veterinarian. The attending veterinarian primarily oversees, well, everything, right, related to animal use. He serves an advisory role to the IACUC in this case, helping us develop protocols, SOPs, policies, and whatnot. He is a required reviewer for what the IRB would consider higher risk applications. Well, we call them Category E, Category D applications, where there's more risk for unalleviated pain or alleviated pain via the use of analgesics and anesthetics. They provide that clinical expertise that most others or no others on the IACUC can really ascribe to. Of course, the clinical veterinarian is actually in facilities, looking at animals, doing health checks, and helping evaluate, potential, treatment of animals that are having problems, and so forth. Our attending vet brings decades of expertise of working with national and international organizations, and has actually helped us do a large-scale evaluation of the program. That guides future development.
Excellent. Thank you so much. The next question I have for the panel really speaks to timelines with processing protocols, right? I mean, a faculty member, a student decides, I've got a research project I'm interested in. I think it's going to require IRB review or IACUC review. How long do they need to start in advance? I mean, do they need to start 6 months ahead of time, 6 weeks, 6 days? Like, what does that typically look like? And what is the interaction between the committee and the individual making the request look like?
Mhm. So from a student's perspective, especially if they're going for a review of research that's going to affect their thesis and dissertation, we always recommended they should start the planning process the semester before they are anticipating collecting their data.
Okay.
I can't tell you how many times we get panic calls from frantic students because they're only starting their process a couple of months before graduation. And our committee members will drop things and make the review process happen. But it's very stressful. It's very stressful for us as well as for that poor student trying to meet their graduation deadline. So you truly can't start early enough on these processes. When it does hit the office here, when the application does come in, it depends on the level of review that's needed. If it's that simple application trying to determine whether something fits into the research category or not, we usually can turn that around in a couple of days. Exempt can take up to a week, expedited can take up to 2 weeks, and full board, again, we meet once a month. And that is only to return initial the initial determination.
Mhm.
You know, if there's problems with the application, you're adding time to that.
Absolutely. Dr. Nelson, jump in here.
Yeah, just following up on what Deb said, I think where we run into a little bit more trouble is where students submit the application and it's part of their learning process. I think it's great that faculty want students to go through that to fill out an application. But where we get into trouble is the student fills it out and the advisor has to sign off on it, but the advisor maybe hasn't had the time to thoroughly go through the application. So those are the ones that we see come back to us a number of times just because of maybe some inexperience on the student investigator's part. So I don't want to downplay the learning experience that's involved in the student doing it. That's great. It just has to be factored in the long run.
Sure, absolutely. Belinda, go ahead.
I just want to, not knowing if we've got any Detroit faculty members on the call or medical students and stuff, if you're going to do something down at Children's Hospital, they also have an institutional review that has to be done. So you've got to factor in the time that besides an IRB review, you may have an institutional review that needs to be done. If you're collaborating with another institution, you may have more time because you may have to work with two institutions because one may say, well, we still need some oversight of the study. We're not letting you, CMU, be the like the IRB of record or the institution of record for the research. So you may have to factor in if you're working with collaborators.
Excellent. Yeah, and speaking to that specifically, Belinda, that was going to lead me to my next question, which is sometimes we deal with these types of multi-institutional engagements using reliance agreements. Can you kind of tell the audience real quickly what is a reliance agreement and when do we utilize those?
Okay, the reliance agreement is used more from the human subject aspect of it. We have had a mandate that has come down from the NIH. OHRP is getting on line with their guidances that they want single IRB reviews, where it's a single institution that everything gets submitted to, and they will make sure that the conduct over multiple institutions, if you've got 10, if you've got 15, if you even have only 2, that you have only one IRB that has the say in reviewing the ethical conduct of the study. And so what a reliance agreement is sitting here saying is we're looking at the protocol and we're sitting here saying we're comfortable enough with the other institution having oversight, but we make sure that there's specific institutional policies that have to be covered, we have oversight of those. So relying is basically saying somebody's taken the lead. So if you're doing a major like NIH grant or an NSF grant, you don't have 25 IRBs having to submit documents. You've got one set of document that's been vetted by one IRB that everybody is going to use.
Excellent. You know, as we're kind of coming to the end of the hour here, I mean, one of the simplest questions is IRB, IACUC, IBC, how do I get started? Where do I find these forms? Is there a link, a website? Where should people go to look for these?
We use an electronic submission system called IRB Manager. So there is, I believe we do have a hyperlink right on the Office of Research Compliance's website. And then I think again, embedded in each one of the committee's individual websites.
Okay. And does it work similarly for IACUC and IBC?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
No. And I was just gonna, if it's okay with you, David, I can even share my screen and show folks where that is.
Yeah, feel free.
Let's see here.
Maybe if somebody else has the web link, they can just drop that in the chat real quick so people have that also.
Right.
There it is. Yeah.
So there's the old My Account page, and I've actually set up a link to IACUC, but the way There it is. Right, so you just end up going to the Office of Research Compliance website, and depending on what you want to do, right, you can go from there. There's animal care and use research, so forth and so on. But as far as getting going on IRB Manager, nice link here, some nice guidance, right? Whether we call them cheat sheets or user guides, right? Which are,
Excellent.
by the way, since IRB Manager is largely driven by institutional customization, institution-based customization, everyone please realize that these documents and the system itself are constantly being updated.
Mhm.
And so please be patient with the staff.
Right, absolutely. And there's new guidance and new best practices that come on the scene all the time. Very pleased to say that our staff has engaged in professional development to make sure that they remain on the leading edge of national standards and best practices. And I just want everyone on this call, as well as our panel, to know that I sleep well every night, knowing that you all look through these protocols and keep us in good graces with where we need to be and leaders in this regard nationally. So with that, we just about exhausted our time. So I want to thank all of our panelists, not only for your work today on the research leadership discussion, but also for all the hours that you put in making sure that we constantly conduct our research ethically, safely, and in accordance with best practices nationally. So does anyone have any parting thoughts that they'd like to offer?
What I really want to say is we're an office here to service the community. If you have questions, we're here to make sure that you do your research in the easiest, the quickest way possible. If you're not sure, please reach out to us. Don't try to muddle through on by yourself, because that may end up causing more problems down the road. So we're here available to help out with any of the most simplest questions that you may come up with to the most complex. If we don't know it, we do have access to consultants that can assist us in trying to get the correct answers so your research can go forward. We're not a department here to cause problems of doing research. We're here to make sure your research gets done.
Absolutely. Like the old Home Depot slogan, right? How doers get things done. So I love that. That is great. We'll end on that. Everyone have a great weekend ahead. Stay warm out there, and thanks for all you do. Fire up, Chips.